Hi guys, on topic today is the issue of domestic violence. The issue of domestic violence, in short, we call it DV. It's such a troubling issue in our society. It has caused death. It's highly rampant. And most people know domestic violence as physical violence to a partner, but it can also be emotional, mental, verbal, and psychological abuse that, is based on how we interact, we speak to each other in our relationships. And such behavior can include, controlling behavior, gaslighting, isolating a partner, insulting them by calling them names, yelling at them, and sometimes shifting blame, just unpredictably having outbursts and shaming them and things like that. So often, though not always, a woman, a wife, a mother is normally the victim, or sometimes called a survivor of domestic violence. And children are often witnesses to such violence, and fathers, males, and male partners in relationships are often the perpetrators, though not always, as I said. In my profession, when we talk of children as witnesses of domestic violence, I'm really mindful that the term witnessing violence may imply that children are just passive observers who just see or hear the violence in the home. But a lot of research has been done in this area, and it actually shows that children can also experience the violence as it's happening in the home. And one of the ways that children experience such violence is when they are also physically hurt during an altercation. I've come across a fair bit of this in my own work. Also, children being on the receiving end of the constant toxic stress of living in a home, in an environment whereby they're in a constant state of alert because of a frightening father, a threatening father, someone who's so unpredictable and inconsistent. And as I said in previous videos, this can damage a developing brain, and it can even have long-term psychological issues for a child. Also, a lot of children who witness domestic violence, research has also shown that they do have a lot of behavior and emotional regulation issues at home and also at school. Another point on that is that domestic violence also affects children in various stages of development. So, for example, it does affect even a child in utero. So say a mother who's experiencing domestic violence, who's pregnant, and is in a constant state of worry and fear about what's going to happen when, the partner comes home. That can have a lot of terrible effects on the on a healthy development of a fetus. In the cases of physical violence, it can even lead to the fetus being harmed or encountering a miscarriage as well. So, of course, it's not just the child who's affected, a parent who's who's perpetrating violence also is not able to care for a child very well. So a perpetrator is obviously quite self-focused. There's no consideration of how their behavior affects other people within the household. And the parent who's on the receiving end of that violence, obviously, is preoccupied with staying safe, keeping themselves safe, and keeping their children safe in all of that. And obviously, in turn, as a parent on the receiving end of that, it's so hard for you to be emotionally present and nurturing to your own child. And we know that children need that emotional nurturing. And of course, domestic violence affects one's mental health, because when you've been treated so poorly for so long, it chips away on your confidence. It chips away and diminishes you as a person, people lose themselves, and that has ongoing scarring on you as an individual internally. And sometimes, maybe something to mention is that sometimes people can be very judgmental on this issue of domestic violence, in terms of especially judging victims of violence who are struggling to leave or who never even leave. And most questions are, why can't she just leave? She keeps talking about being abused, and the thing I want to say is this issue is much more complex than we think. It's not just as simple as, why can't she just leave? And the way I make sense of this is that, given there's an emotional relationship, as we do with our partners, these emotional relationships are so much more complex than that. So it's similarly with a woman and a perpetrator. There is an emotional relationship there that is very complex, as most relationships are. Another way I make sense of that is that, because it might be seen as an excuse or whatever, but when children are involved, it's so much more difficult, because maybe a victim is trying to keep these children safe. Another common one is, in most cases, because I guess with how things are, mothers of victims are the ones at home with the children. They can be financially disadvantaged. And those are some of the things that can be really, really difficult, and I guess be a barrier to a woman leaving. So it's really important for us to be empathetic for women who really suffer in this relationship and struggle to leave. So, however, all of this to say that, and not to diminish the safety of children in relationships, there needs to be someone to step up so that children are not being constantly exposed to these experiences. Because most of us as adults are walking around with scars from experiences of domestic violence from our own parents, and this kind of thing can easily cause intergenerational problems when we don't take time to mentalize and think about how such experiences in our childhood that we witnessed or experienced does affect how we do relationships today. So because we witnessed unhealthy interactions between our parents, it does not mean that we need to repeat that behavior, because we know now it's not okay behavior. And we are adults who have a lot of resources on our disposal. We know, even on a visceral level, that certain behavior is not okay. So we need to be able to challenge and change and challenge ourselves to do better, because when we know better, we do better. And this issue of domestic violence, it's a perpetrator issue to resolve and take responsibility for. And it's our job as a society, and people who can be onlookers or people who look from the outside, to, when we come across such people, pull them up on it. Don't accept being treated poorly. Don't accept being spoken to badly. Hold people accountable. Be respectful, obviously, and kind, but refuse to accept abusive interactions and violence when you see it around the place. And yeah, so the bottom line is, perpetrators are responsible to change their own behavior. We can't do that for them. And so obviously in my job, I have come across a fair bit of perpetrators of violence. And I do ask them to reflect on a number of questions. And one of those questions I ask them to reflect on is, why do I keep hurting the people I love? Because this is not okay. So that's one of the questions I do ask them to think about. Second, I do ask them to think about, is this the kind of person who harm and hit and abuse the people they love? Is that the kind of person they want to be? And also I ask them to think about the beliefs, the stereotypes, the attitudes that they've picked up growing up or in friendships or whatever, that are problematic for them, to perpetrate this behavior to other people in their family. And also to just check on whether they need help, to examine these behaviors, to reflect on these behaviors, because sometimes some people don't actually know until they get the help from other people. But it's also important to acknowledge that most of the societies we live in are very patriarchal cultures, and they have over time reinforced very unhelpful stereotypes about gender. And if we are not attentive or careful about the messaging we pick up in our culture, some men start to do harmful things because they implicitly actually think and believe that they are superior than women. And at times, some women internalize the idea that they are actually inferior and accept poor treatment, when we know all of this is a lie. It's just a construct. And the truth is that we're all human beings and who have our own strengths and our own weaknesses, and we need each other to coexist and also to, I guess, reproduce. So all I say is, if you grew up watching males treat females poorly, I'd like to bluntly put it to you that just because people do bad things for extended periods of time, for many years, for many generations, doesn't make those bad things okay. And it doesn't mean that we accept those things as they are and perpetrate those in incoming generations. So that's not okay. So we need to think about these things and how we can do better. Because the stakes are high, because if we are raising little humans who are completely dependent on us to guide them through life, it's much more important for us to do better. So I'd like us to all stop and reflect on some of those questions. Some questions that I would like to just ask generally. Why do I do relationships the way I do? Are there things that I do in relationships or friendships that can be inconsiderate, even abusive, or not very nice? And are people around me too fearful to pull me up on some of those things as well? I think that's an important introspection to have. And also, what am I teaching my children? What am I teaching my nieces, my nephews, and about how to do relationships the way, based on how I do them? And how can you change? How can you do things differently? I'm really interested to hearing your views. Please share any reflections, thoughts, and views about this. Thanks for listening.